Welcome to Wednesday, What If, by the storyteller. What if Wednesday Addams was a witch, just like her ancestor Goody Addams? What if Wednesday was called upon by Goody when her powers started manifesting a year earlier than in the original timeline, and she met Tyler before Miss Thornhill, aka Laura Gates? Like, comment, and subscribe to be updated. Chapter 9 and Addams Quinceañera. Tyler felt a strange mix of admiration and anxiety as he prepared the coffee for Eudora Addams in the cozy, dimly lit drawing room. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, but it did little to calm his nerves. He had noticed that the elderly matriarch of the Addams family carried an air of mystery, one that seemed to loom over everything she did. Eudora, with her sharp eyes, gray hair neatly bundled beneath a pristine black hat, and her poised, almost regal mannerisms, was a woman who clearly knew far more than she ever let on. He had always been curious about her, but now, after what he'd learned about the family, especially after Wednesday's cryptic hints about their history, Tyler's curiosity had only deepened. He set the teacup before her, carefully, and stood back. "Black, yes?" Tyler asked, trying to sound casual, but it was difficult in the presence of someone like Eudora. Of course, Eudora replied in a tone that made it sound as though the question was almost beneath her. She took the cup with both hands and brought it to her lips, inhaling deeply as if savoring more than just the aroma. Tyler stood in awkward silence for a moment, unsure of how to proceed. He was still trying to wrap his head around everything that had happened, from his time with Wednesday to the strange atmosphere that seemed to hover around the Addams family. They were undeniably unlike anyone else he'd ever met, and he couldn't help but wonder if they were hiding something, or if the things Wednesday had hinted at were just as weird as they seemed. "Do you know a lot about Wednesday's family history?" Tyler finally asked, breaking the silence. His voice was quiet, and he immediately regretted the question. But Eudora didn't seem to mind. She lowered her teacup, studied him for a moment, and then replied in that smooth, slightly old-fashioned tone of hers. "I know everything about her history, dear boy," Eudora said with a touch of amusement in her voice, a small smile playing at the edges of her lips. "But what you're asking about is a matter much too private for casual conversation. However, I suppose you have the right to know, especially since you're involved in it." Tyler frowned. "Involved? How am I involved?" Eudora regarded him for a long moment, her eyes narrowing as if measuring his worth. "You've come to a crossroads, Tyler. There are truths about Wednesday's family, about our family, that you need to understand. But I must insist, what I'm about to share with you cannot leave this room. Not to anyone, not even to your father. Do you understand?" Tyler nodded quickly, his heart beginning to race. He wasn't sure what was about to unfold, but there was something about Eudora's stern expression that made him take her seriously. His curiosity was piqued, but so was a growing sense of unease. "Yes," Tyler said. "I swear. I won't tell anyone." Eudora set her teacup down with careful grace, her fingers lingering on the delicate porcelain. The air in the room seemed to shift, the weight of her words sinking in as she continued. "We are descended from witches, Tyler," she said quietly. "Real witches. Powers that go beyond what any normal person could comprehend. And Wednesday," she paused, her eyes gleaming. "Wednesday is one of us." Tyler blinked, his mind racing to catch up with her words. He thought back to the strange, almost magical occurrences that seemed to follow Wednesday wherever she went, the way she always seemed to know things, even things she shouldn't. "You're saying that Wednesday is a witch?" Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eudora nodded, her gaze hardening. "Yes. And our family line is old, older than most of the so-called normies you know. We've been around for centuries, and in that time, we've been persecuted for what we are. My ancestors were burned at the stake, hunted down like animals, all because we are different. Our kind was almost wiped out. But we survived." Tyler felt a chill run through him as he processed the information. He'd heard of witches, of course, there were myths, legends, but this was real. And he could see, even in Eudora's eyes, the weight of the history she was talking about. A long line of women and men who had suffered, hidden, and survived for generations, only to be buried under a veil of secrecy. Why did they hide it? Tyler asked, suddenly feeling a little lightheaded. Why couldn't anyone know? Eudora's gaze grew even colder, and her voice lowered to a near whisper. Because being a witch is a curse. The world will never accept us for who we are, Tyler. People are too afraid, too ignorant to understand. We are outcasts, and that's how we'll always be viewed. Normies think witches are myths, but the truth is, we're very much alive, and very much real. She paused, then looked up at him. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is the stigma. The moment anyone knows about us, they begin to fear us. Use us. Our family, my family, has learned to keep our secret. To stay hidden in plain sight. Those who know about us are few, and they are kept close. Tyler's mind was spinning. His head felt full, like everything he thought he knew about the world had been turned upside down. He looked at Eudora, the elderly woman who was now his only source of truth, and swallowed hard. So, you're saying no one is supposed to know? Tyler asked. Not even people who are part of the family. Eudora's eyes softened just a fraction. Only those born with Addams' blood know the truth about us, Tyler. You may not have known it, but you are now a part of that secret. And you must keep it, always. Even Wednesday does not know everything about this family. It is not something we can just share with anyone. Tyler sat back, absorbing her words. Everything he thought he understood about the Addams family was now in question. And yet, some part of him felt like this revelation fit into the strange pieces of the puzzle that had been his life at the Addams mansion. They were more than just peculiar, they were extraordinary. You need to take a few pages from Wednesday's book, Tyler, Eudora continued, a touch of advice in her voice. Don't trust easily. People will seek to use you, to take advantage of what you now know. It's best to remain cautious, even of those who claim to care for you. Tyler nodded, still grappling with the enormity of what he'd just learned. The strange mix of affection, mystery, and caution that defined the Addams family had taken on a new, more complicated dimension. His feelings of displacement had only deepened, but so had his understanding of just how deep the Addams legacy ran. The days passed, and despite the lingering unease that tugged at his chest, Tyler tried to immerse himself in the world of the Addams family. He learned how to hunt with Mr. Addams, how to shoot a bow, and how to fence. Even tried his hand at prospecting for gold, something he'd never imagined he would do, much less enjoy. Through it all, Tyler couldn't shake the strange feeling of being out of place, but there were moments when he found himself enjoying the activities. They were unconventional, but they were real, and they made him feel more capable than he had before. On the final day of his visit, Gomez Addams handed Tyler a check for the work he'd done with the wash plant. That's not how this works, my boy, Gomez said with his typical enthusiasm. I only own the land and the wash plant. You're the one who did all the hard work. I'll take my 10% and a few pennies for maintenance, but the rest is yours. Tyler stared down at the check in disbelief. The amount was staggering. It was enough to cover an entire year of college tuition and rent. In just a few days of helping out, he'd made more money than he ever could have dreamed of. More than what he and his father earned in a year. Mr. Addams, this is, Tyler stammered, holding the check in his hand. I don't know what to say. Say nothing, my boy. Gomez laughed heartily. It's a small token of appreciation. But remember, no matter what happens, you're always welcome here. As Tyler left the Addams estate, the weight of everything he had learned pressed heavily on his chest. His trip had come to an end, but the knowledge he carried with him would stay for a lifetime. He was no longer just a visitor in their world, he was now part of the Addams family's secret. And he would never look at the world, or them, the same way again. The fall midterms at Nevermore Academy had come to a close, ushering in the much-anticipated Harvest Festival and Raven celebrations. For most students, the end of midterms meant the beginning of the festivities, but for one student, the approaching events were a source of dread. Wednesday Addams's birthday was in just a few days, and while the rest of the school geared up for the usual celebrations, her family had other plans that seemed to involve the entire Addams clan. It wasn't just any birthday. It was Wednesday's quinceañera, a momentous occasion for her, though she made it clear to anyone who would listen that it wasn't her celebration. It was, instead, an extravagant affair crafted by her parents, Morticia and Gomez Addams, to showcase their daughter to the world, as only the Addams family could. Wednesday's classmates, however, didn't share her reluctance. As boxes of decorations and luxurious ballgowns began arriving at Nevermore, Eden couldn't contain her excitement. The dresses, elegant, black and white designer creations, were unlike anything Eden had seen before. She clapped her hands with glee as she held up one of the gowns. "Wednesday's going to look amazing in this," she exclaimed, holding it up to her body as if she were wearing it. The material was an intricate lace adorned with tiny pearls, and the gown's layers had a mysterious air of both elegance and Gothic allure. The students who had gathered in the room marveled at the luxurious decorations that filled the ballroom. Hanging chandeliers of dark crystal flickered with candlelight, casting eerie shadows across the floor. Black roses cascaded from every corner, and delicate cobweb-like threads swirled around the stage and its towering dark chocolate cake. The cake itself looked like a work of art, with 15 layers of decadently rich chocolate stacked high, each layer adorned with intricate carvings that made it look almost alive. It was the kind of over-the-top decoration that only the Addams family could pull off, and to the other students, it was a scene straight out of a Gothic fairy tale. Even the ceiling had been transformed into a dark, starry sky, punctuated by swirling clouds of mist that crept down the walls, creating a surreal atmosphere. The air was thick with a sense of eerie anticipation. The theme of the party was clear, dark elegance mixed with macabre charm, but what was most surprising to the students was how normal this all seemed to Wednesday's parents, who seemed to thrive in such an atmosphere. "Isn't this just the best?" Eden said, beaming as she twirled in front of the dressing mirror, her eyes catching the reflection of one of the grand ballgowns. "Everything is so beautifully creepy. This looks like something out of one of those black and white classic horror movies." But while Eden was lost in the excitement of the preparations, Wednesday herself was nowhere to be found. As the noise of the preparations escalated and Nevermore turned into an impromptu party venue, Wednesday made her quiet escape. She slipped away from her responsibilities and headed to the one place where she could retreat from the madness, the Weathervane. This small cafe had become her sanctuary, where she could read and enjoy the quiet far away from the looming chaos of her parents' extravagant plans. As the preparations for her quinceañera continued to ramp up at Nevermore, Wednesday had become increasingly reclusive. After classes finished each day, she would slip away from the chaos, leaving her roommates and classmates to fuss over decorations and party details. Her sanctuary became the Weathervane, a quiet cafe on the edge of the campus, where the usual din of school life seemed a world away. One afternoon, as Wednesday settled into her favorite corner of the cafe with a book and a mug of black coffee, Tyler Galpin, who had quickly become one of her few friends, appeared at her table. His presence was both comforting and amusing to her, given the circumstances. He slid into the chair across from her and set a steaming cup of coffee down in front of her. "Shouldn't you be preparing for your party?" Tyler asked, studying her with a small, teasing smile. Wednesday didn't even glance up from her book. She took a sip of the coffee, savoring the bitterness. "It's not my party, it's theirs. My parents are just using me as an excuse to host a celebration for themselves," she replied in her usual dry tone, her voice flat and unaffected by the tone of the event. She didn't seem upset by it, it was just an inescapable fact of life in the Addams family. Tyler leaned back, trying to gauge whether she was serious. He couldn't help but smile as he recalled his brief time with Morticia and Gomez in Alaska. "I don't know if you noticed, but your mom taught me traditional dances while we were there," he said, a hint of fondness creeping into his voice. "I think she's got the whole waltzing thing down to a fine art." Wednesday finally looked up, eyes narrowing slightly as she gave him a quick, but meaningful glance. "I know." Tyler's smile faltered, trying to read her response. "Do you have an escort yet?" Her lips barely moved as she replied, "No." Tyler sighed, a playful edge to his tone as he realized how she was avoiding the subject. You're not making this easy, are you? Wednesday returned to her book, her fingers tracing the edges of the pages. She didn't seem bothered by the conversation at all, but Tyler could tell she was trying to hide how uncomfortable she was with the entire situation. Did my parents put you up to this? She asked, finally addressing the elephant in the room. Her voice was cool, but there was a subtle edge to it. Tyler shook his head, smiling widely. No, of course not. It's just, well, your whole family's coming, right? Aren't you even a little excited to see them? Wednesday's expression remained unchanged. She looked at him for a moment, almost as if she were considering his question. My skin crawls every day in anticipation. Tyler chuckled. That's great, he said, his grin widening as he picked up on the dark humor that defined the Addams family. It was clear now that her form of excitement was, well, a bit more macabre than most people's. He had come to realize that this was how they showed affection, through bizarre, dark, and slightly twisted expressions of love. The Addams were proud of their weirdness, and Tyler found himself more and more fascinated by their unapologetic nature, so different from the normie families he was used to. Wednesday fixed her gaze on him, an almost bored look in her eyes, before she spoke again. Let me guess, you want to be my escort? Tyler met her gaze with a playful glint in his eyes. If you'll let me. Fine, Wednesday said flatly, her eyes already returning to the book in front of her, though she couldn't quite suppress the faintest hint of a smile tugging at her lips. She knew Tyler wasn't going to let her hide forever, and his attempt to break through her wall of indifference wasn't entirely unwelcome. At least he wasn't like the other students, all of whom seemed eager to fit into the mold of the typical teenager. He was comfortable in his own skin, and in a strange way, so was she. Tyler leaned forward, folding his arms on the table. I'm honored, I guess. You sure you don't want someone more exciting? Like, I don't know, one of your cousins? Wednesday didn't look up from her book, but replied dryly, they'd probably stab me before the first dance. Tyler laughed, the sound genuine and loud in the otherwise quiet cafe. Well, I do know how to fence, in case anyone tries anything. How reassuring, Wednesday replied, her voice flat, though there was a hint of amusement in her eyes. Tyler's grin grew. So, we're good then? Wednesday hesitated, then nodded. You're my escort, Tyler. Now stop talking, I'm trying to read. The two fell into a comfortable silence, with Wednesday absorbed in her book and Tyler watching her, still a little amused by how unfazed she was by the absurdity of it all. It was strange, but Tyler liked this side of her. No pretense, no fake smiles, just the sharp, sarcastic wit that he had come to enjoy. And though Wednesday hadn't fully admitted it, Tyler knew this odd, quiet comfort was something she craved more than the grand spectacle of her family's absurd celebrations. The ambush hit Wednesday like a freight train. She had just returned to her dorm room, expecting to find at least a moment's peace, when a group of students from the Nightshade Secret Society rushed in. Before she could react, a dark bag was thrown over her head, shrouding her in darkness. She struggled, but their grip was firm and efficient, and the bag was soon cinched tightly around her neck. The world spun disorientingly for a few seconds as they carried her through the halls, until they finally stopped. The bag was ripped from her face, and Wednesday blinked against the harsh light of her now vastly transformed dorm room. Her room was no longer the sanctuary of books and quiet. It had been overrun. Dresses, elegant, delicate, designer dresses, now cluttered the space. Shoes lined the walls, each pair more extravagant than the last, with labels like Chanel, Louis Vuitton, and Versace staring back at her in the most obnoxious display of wealth she had ever seen. Eden, Bianca, Yoko, and several other members of the Nightshade Secret Society were in her room, picking through her things as if it were their own personal shopping spree. Bianca held up a delicate black dress, a mix of silk and lace, her eyes gleaming with something close to obsession. Wednesday, you have to wear this one, she said with an almost reverent tone, clearly enamored with the dress's opulence. Yoko, who had a penchant for the extravagant, gasped as she picked up a pair of red-soled Louis Vuitton pumps. "Oh, look at these shoes," she marveled, her eyes widening at the shiny patent leather. "These would make anyone's feet look perfect." Bianca, never one to be impressed with Wednesday's consistent refusal of anything remotely normal, scoffed as she flipped through a rack of dresses. "It's a shame everything's in black and white," she said, eyeing the monochrome outfits with disdain. "Wouldn't it be nice to see you in something colorful for once?" Wednesday crossed her arms, narrowing her eyes. The room was spinning with the sheer absurdity of it all. She had made it clear to everyone that she wanted no part in this party, yet here they were, again, trying to force her into some cookie-cutter version of the perfect party princess. "What are you all doing here?" Wednesday asked coldly, her voice as sharp as ever. Eden, in her usual bubbly yet authoritative manner, flashed a smile. "Your mom asked us to help you pick out your dress, Wednesday." "Of course she did," Wednesday replied dryly, already tired of this whole charade. "Because clearly, I have no opinions of my own." Bianca, who had clearly had enough of Wednesday's sarcasm, glared at her. "You have no idea how lucky you are," she snapped, her tone bordering on venomous. "There are people dying for a party like the one your family is throwing. This is the kind of thing people would kill for." "Then they should," Wednesday shot back, her lips curling into a cold, disdainful smile. Just then, the door opened with a creak, and in walked two figures that made Wednesday's heart drop into her stomach, her mother, Morticia, gliding gracefully into the room as always, and her grandmother, the matriarch of their family, the intimidating and always cryptic Eudora Addams. "There's my granddaughter," Morticia purred, her voice full of warmth and pride, yet a hint of something darker lingered beneath. She walked to Wednesday, her long fingers brushing across the racks of dresses. "Isn't it lovely? All of it. We just wanted you to have the best." Wednesday stared back at her, unblinking. Best? Her parents seemed incapable of understanding her desire to avoid their manufactured celebrations. She didn't need any of this pomp, all she needed was peace and quiet. Her grandmother, Eudora, however, was not interested in the trivialities of dresses or parties. Without a word, she reached down into her black leather bag and pulled out a long, thin object wrapped in velvet. She held it out to Wednesday with a knowing look. "Here, my dear," Eudora said in a low, solemn voice. "I have something much more appropriate for your quinceañera." She opened the box, revealing a perfectly crafted fencing blade. It gleamed in the light, the steel as sharp and cold as the matriarch's smile. Wednesday's classmates watched, wide-eyed, as they took in the sight of the blade, an heirloom from a long line of skilled Addams fencers. The sheer elegance and danger of it were immediately evident. It wasn't just any blade, it was a symbol, one that carried with it centuries of family tradition and an unspoken promise. "Kill them tomorrow," Eudora said quietly, her voice laced with a dark edge. It was not a suggestion, but a command. Her eyes never left Wednesday's as she handed over the blade. It was clear that she expected nothing less than for Wednesday to rise to the occasion. This was how the Addams family celebrated. Not with dresses and cake, but with sharp blades and honor. The room was still for a moment, as if everyone in it were processing what had just been said. Wednesday, however, stood unmoved. She took the blade from her grandmother's hands, with the same stoic expression she always wore, inspecting it with careful eyes. "I understand, Grandmama," she replied coolly, the faintest glint of excitement flashing in her eyes as she acknowledged her grandmother's rare but unmistakable approval. It was not a challenge, but an understanding. The other girls from Nightshade, still reeling from the shock, exchanged nervous glances. They had no idea what they had just gotten themselves into. Fencing was not a casual sport for the Addams family. It was not about fun or competition, it was a way of life. "Tomorrow," Wednesday repeated softly, looking at her grandmother with a sadistic smile that sent a chill through the room. "I'll be ready." Eden and Bianca stood frozen, unsure of how to respond. They knew their families threw parties to celebrate milestones, but this? This was something altogether different. And they were about to learn exactly what being an Addams meant. No one was safe from the consequences of crossing them. As the group of girls slowly backed away, unsure of whether to stay or leave. Eudora's sharp gaze followed them. "If you'd like to stay for the festivities," she said sweetly, "you might want to keep your distance." There was no room for second-guessing in the Addams family. Wednesday, her fingers tightening around the fencing blade, turned to her mother and grandmother. "Shall we begin?" The game was about to change, and the rules were most certainly not what anyone expected. Like, comment, and subscribe to be notified for updates on this series.